Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Today we're diving into the world of Hogwarts, but not through the grand front doors. We're heading backstage. No talk of magical beasts, potions, or dark artifacts. Today it's all about those who make Hogwarts what it is, the professors. Who are they? How do they get there? And why does their job feel so strange, mysterious, and strangely unexplained? If you read the Harry Potter series carefully, you'll notice a lot of questions, not about the characters, but about the wizarding education system itself. Let's try to tackle the most puzzling ones. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Do professors need any formal education? In the Muggle world, teachers spend years training and qualifying, but at Hogwarts, they teach potions, charms, herbology, all of which require deep knowledge and enormous responsibility. Yet sometimes it feels like the staff is hired straight off the street. Hagrid, expelled from school with a snapped wand, is a teacher. Lockhart, all charm and no skill, is somehow hired to teach defense against the dark arts. Trelawney, a seer whose predictions even magical creatures would doubt, has held her post for decades. Who checks their qualifications? Is there even such a thing as wizarding pedagogy? Number 2, how are they hired and by whom? Everything about the Hogwarts hiring process is cloaked in mystery. We know the headmaster is appointed by the Board of Governors, but the rest of the staff, that's Dumbledore's domain. If he wants to hire someone, he does. If he wants to fire someone, same deal. That's how Hagrid, Lockhart and Trelawney all got their posts. Even Snape at first was denied the job he most wanted. No diplomas, no recommendations, not even a mental health screening. Just Dumbledore's trust and gut feeling, which, let's admit, only makes the whole thing even more mysterious. Number 3. How much are they paid? Money in the wizarding world is its own form of magic. We don't know how much it costs to attend Hogwarts, and we definitely don't know how much professors earn. Some fan theories suggest a skilled wizard might make around 8,400 galleons a year. Sounds decent. Until you realize Harry gave the Weasley twins 1,000 galleons, and that was enough to launch an entire shop. So what is a Hogwarts salary? Room and board, perhaps, but they're on call almost 24/7, and even if contracts exist, we've never seen one. Number 4. Do they have personal lives? Hogwarts professors live at Hogwarts. They each have personal quarters, a few hobbies, maybe a cat. But do they have families, spouses, children? What does Professor Sprout do in the evenings? Or Flitwick? Or Vector? Can they pop over to Hogsmeade after hours? Take a weekend trip to London? We never see it. The job feels like a life sentence. Married to the school and nothing else. Number 5. How much power do they really have? At Hogwarts, being a teacher means more than giving lectures. You fight off trolls, break curses, put out fires, sometimes literally, and even save lives. Professors like Snape can shout at students, hand out punishments, and overlook their favourites' misconduct. McGonagall strives for fairness. Umbridge, she weaponizes discipline. They can reward, punish, even expel students. But where does their authority end? What's written in official guidelines? And what's simply tradition? Number 6. Do they contribute to magical research? Dumbledore famously discovered 12 uses for dragon's blood. Snape invented new spells while still a student. But what about the others? Is McGonagall experimenting with new transfiguration methods? Is Sprout studying lethal plants? Are there magical conferences? Do professors publish papers in the Daily Prophet or any magical journals? They've been teaching for decades. Surely they've created something of value, but we never see it. Is magical research reserved only for non-teachers? Number 7. How did Tom Riddle curse the job? One of the most intriguing mysteries, the curse on the defense against the dark arts position. Riddle was rejected twice, once by Dippet, then by Dumbledore. In retaliation, legend says he cursed the position, ensuring no one could hold it for more than a year. But how do you curse a job? Not a room, not a person, a concept. If they changed the course name, would it still work? Does magic distinguish titles? Or was Riddle's spell so subtle and powerful that it somehow knows who's teaching what? Number 8. Are there any teaching guidelines or standards? In Prisoner of Azkaban, Professor Lupin walks into his first class and tells the students, we're going to be dealing with dark creatures. No textbook, no list of objectives, just a wardrobe with a boggart inside. It's effective, exciting, and entirely improvised. Compare that to Trelawney's divination class, where the room is thick with incense and stuffed with crystal balls. The inner eye is awoken, she whispers. But there's no clear goal, no structure. Every professor seems to teach how they want, when they want, with whatever materials they choose. There's no sign of a curriculum committee, no shared lesson plans, no standardized exams except for the OWLs which come from the ministry, not the school. Until then, students are at the mercy of their professor's style. Snape assigns pages of potion theory, Hagrid shows them a blast-ended scroot, Flitwick teaches exact wand movement. Who decides what students need to know by the end of the year? No one says. And without shared guidelines, education at Hogwarts depends entirely on who's holding the chalk or the wand. Number 9. How is qualification assessed for vague subjects? In Prisoner of Azkaban, Professor Trelawney delivers a real prophecy, but only by accident. The rest of the time, her lessons are filled with vague predictions and dramatic gasps. Hermione quits divination in frustration, saying, "It's rubbish, isn't it?" And yet Trelawney keeps her post for years. Who decided she was qualified in the first place? Dumbledore admits he hired her mostly because she made one genuine prophecy. Not because of a teaching certificate, not because of any clear skill, just a single moment of uncontrolled vision. Then there's Professor Electo Caro in Deathly Hallows. She teaches Muggle studies with open hatred. Muggles are like animals, she declares. No debate, no counterpoint, just pure ideology. And again, no one stops her because the Death Eaters run the school. But even before that, the subject lacked clear structure. What qualifies someone to teach Muggle life? Is there a test, a standard, or do personal opinions define the whole curriculum? In subjects without hard rules, Hogwarts seems to run on trust, bias, and guesswork, and students pay the price. Number 10. Do professors go through regular evaluations? In all 7 books, there isn't a single mention of a teacher being evaluated. No inspector, no exam board, no magical audit. Professor Flitwick, though charming and talented, has been teaching charms for decades. But does anyone check if his lessons still reflect modern spell theory, or if the incantations he teaches haven't been replaced by safer, more efficient versions? There's a quiet assumption that experience equals excellence. But even magic evolves. Take Professor Sprout. Her work with mandrakes in Chamber of Secrets was vital. The moment their acne clears up, they'll be mature enough to be used in a restorative draft, she tells the class. But what if a new herbologist discovers a better method, a faster-growing route? Does Sprout update her syllabus or stick to tradition? No one seems to ask. No external authority ever steps in to test her knowledge. At Hogwarts, once you're hired, you're trusted indefinitely. It's easy to imagine a scene where an outside expert visits for a day, maybe from the Department of Magical Education, a quiet observer in the corner of the classroom. But that never happens. The only evaluation we ever see is Umbridge's tyranny in Order of the Phoenix. And that wasn't about quality, it was about control. True professional growth, real feedback, peer review. Those things don't exist in Hogwarts. The staff runs on memory, instinct, and the hope that no one's fallen behind. Number 11. Who replaces a teacher in case of absence? When Professor Lupin takes sick leave in Prisoner of Azkaban, Snape steps in to cover his defense against the dark arts class. The result? A lesson on werewolves delivered with venomous intent. Turn to page 394, he says coldly, ignoring questions. It's not education, it's sabotage, and it reveals something troubling. There's no formal substitute system at Hogwarts, no designated backups, just the nearest available teacher, no matter their motives or qualifications. We never see a lesson in transfiguration taught by anyone but McGonagall. What happens if she's ill? Does Flitwick try to manage it between charms classes, or is the lesson simply cancelled? Hogwarts doesn't seem to have teaching assistants or floating staff. There's no record of trained substitutes, only a patchwork of improvisation. When Dumbledore disappears in Order of the Phoenix, there's no official stand-in. The castle simply braces for uncertainty. It raises questions. If a subject like potions depends entirely on Snape, what happens if he's gone for a week? Or if Hagrid's off dealing with giants again, do his lessons stop altogether? The books remain silent. There's no scene where someone says, "Professor so-and-so is out. Madam Hooch will be taking over today." Instead, Hogwarts operates like an old magical clock held together by trust, habit, and a bit of luck. Number 12. Who oversees classroom safety? In Prisoner of Azkaban, Hagrid's very first lesson ends with Draco Malfoy screaming in the dirt, his arm supposedly mauled by a hippogriff named Buckbeak. "You didn't tell us they could be dangerous," Draco yells, clutching his arm. But Hagrid did. He warned them to be respectful. Still, the moment turns chaotic. Buckbeak is sentenced to death, Hagrid is heartbroken, and no one questions why a creature with razor-sharp talons was brought to a class full of 13-year-olds. Where was the safety protocol? Where was the checklist? At Hogwarts, danger seems to be part of the curriculum. In Chamber of Secrets, Professor Lockhart releases a swarm of Cornish pixies into the classroom. "Let's see what you make of them," he shouts, before the pixies wreck the room, lift Neville into the air, and nearly destroy every piece of furniture. Lockhart flees. The students are left to fend for themselves, and again, no one intervenes. No investigation, no safety officer. It's as if the teachers are their own security clearance. If they believe it's safe, then it must be. But magic doesn't always cooperate. And when it backfires, the only backup seems to be Madame Pomfrey. Exploding cauldrons, hexed quills, vanishing staircases. These are everyday hazards, so who's responsible? McGonagall, Dumbledore, Filch? No handbook is ever mentioned, no safety inspector ever visits. The professors wield full control over their classrooms and their judgment is final. If something goes wrong, they fix it or cover it up. The school trusts them completely, perhaps too much. As Hermione once mutters after a dangerous lesson, "Honestly, I don't know how this place is still open." Number 13, can a professor switch the subject they teach? In Half-Blood Prince, Severus Snape finally gets the job he's been chasing for years, Defense Against the Dark Arts. "You have no idea how long I've wanted this job," he says to Harry with a chilling smile. But for years before that, he was stuck teaching potions, despite being clearly more passionate, almost obsessively so, about the dark arts. Why the delay? Why did Dumbledore keep him away from the subject he desired most? The books suggest one thing: it wasn't just about qualifications, it was about trust. Dumbledore for years feared what might happen if Snape got too close to the darkness again. So, can a professor switch subjects? Technically, yes. Snape proves it, but it's not automatic. Someone, likely the headmaster, has to approve the change. It's not like McGonagall can just walk into breakfast and say, "Today I'm teaching care of magical creatures." Even if she's a brilliant witch, she would probably still need to show some knowledge of the new field. And Dumbledore, being the careful chess player he was, wouldn't allow just anyone to shuffle around the curriculum like it's a wizarding board game. The case of Gilderoy Lockhart adds another layer. He was given the Defense Against the Dark Arts position with almost no proof of actual skill. All he had was a smile, a stack of best-selling books, and a ministry-approved reputation. Dumbledore knew the truth, yet he still hired him. Was it a test, a trap, or was Dumbledore so desperate to fill the cursed position that he abandoned all normal hiring standards? If professors can shift roles so easily, why didn't someone else step in when the position was vacant, like Flitwick or even Hooch? Ultimately, subject changes in Hogwarts seem based more on politics, personal judgment, and gut feeling than on formal process. There's no mention of interviews, exams, or peer reviews, just quiet decisions made behind closed doors. Maybe that's why the school thrives in chaos, or maybe that's part of the magic, only those truly meant for the subject will end up teaching it, even if it takes them 6 books to get there. Number 14, do teachers get vacation time? In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, when Dumbledore visits the Dursleys to pick up Harry, he casually remarks, "I would assume that you are used to hosting Harry during the summer holidays." This implies that even the headmaster of Hogwarts takes time away from the castle during the break. But the question remains, do the rest of the professors enjoy any form of vacation? Hogwarts operates on a clear academic calendar. 9 months of school, 3 months of holiday, but we never hear of a teacher retreating to a cosy cottage in Cornwall or sipping butterbeer on a beach in southern France. Not once do we see Professor McGonagall packing her suitcase for rest, or Flitwick locking up his charms classroom with a satisfied sigh. Yet the school doesn't just fall silent. After all, someone must maintain the castle's enchantments, restock potion ingredients, feed the hippogriffs, and tame the Whomping Willow before September. Is this summer workload divided between teachers, or do the house elves bear the burden alone? There's no official mention of a faculty vacation policy, no scene where Snape scowls about being denied time off. Given his general demeanor, though, one could imagine him using the summer to brew more dark and dangerous potions away from dunderheads and distractions. Hogwarts, being a place of constant magical flux, likely demands attention year-round. One curious detail comes in the Order of the Phoenix. During the summer, Professor Sprout is noted to be busy preparing the greenhouses for the new year. This confirms that some professors stay on school grounds during the break. But is it voluntary or required? Who decides? Is there a magical HR department buried deep in the dungeons? Or does Dumbledore send out letters saying, "Dear Minerva, I trust you had a restful solstice. Kindly be back by August 1st for staff planning"? There's no explanation, no structure, just implication and silence. And what happens in emergencies? After the Battle of Hogwarts in Deathly Hallows, when the walls were shattered and bodies buried beneath rubble, someone had to restore the castle. Did McGonagall, now headmistress, cancel everyone's holiday and issue rebuilding assignments? Perhaps Flitwick reinforced charms on the broken towers, while Hagrid replanted the forbidden forest's edge. It's tempting to imagine them all working together, covered in dust, pausing only to share a fire whiskey. But without answers from the text, we're left with only guesses and a strong suspicion that Hogwarts vacations are less about beaches and more about broomsticks and blueprints. Number 15, do professors have assistants? Of all the mysteries buried within the magical walls of Hogwarts, none is more quietly unsettling than the question of who, if anyone, helps the professors manage their enormous workloads. The grandeur of the enchanted castle, the rigor of its education, the complexity of the magic being taught, these all suggest a sophisticated institution run with military precision. But on closer inspection, one detail remains conspicuously absent from both books and films: teaching assistants. How, for instance, does Professor Snape, notoriously strict and infamously unsympathetic, personally grade hundreds of essays on the properties of wolfsbane or the effects of shrivel figs on potion potency without any support? Snape's temperament is ill-suited for paperwork, yet J.K. Rowling never describes anyone else assisting him. When Harry turns in his homework, it is Snape's red ink that slashes across the parchment. In The Half-Blood Prince, Harry even recognizes Snape's handwriting in the margins of an old potions textbook. This personal touch reveals that Snape not only grades the essays himself, but also writes extensive commentary, all while preparing intricate lesson plans, conducting practicals, and ensuring that no dunderhead blows up their cauldron. Even the Muggle world, with its less explosive science classes, has teaching assistants. Why not Hogwarts? Consider transfiguration, one of the most technically demanding branches of magic. Professor McGonagall teaches students to transfigure animals into goblets and needles into matchsticks. She also supervises the complicated animagus registration process and attends all staff meetings. Yet we never hear of a single aide helping her manage the dozens of students she teaches across all 4 houses and all 7 years. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, McGonagall is shown walking briskly from one end of the castle to the other, balancing disciplinary duties with teaching responsibilities, but at no point does anyone step forward to relieve her of even the most menial tasks. There's no mention of assistance even during exams, a logistical nightmare involving hundreds of students, magical obstacles, and potentially dangerous results. In the Goblet of Fire, practical examinations involve complex spells like the Patronus Charm and transfiguring live animals, tasks that would surely require monitoring and evaluation. Yet, the only adult presences are the professors themselves. How can one teacher supervise 20 students casting dangerous magic at the same time? It is tempting to assume that perhaps older students serve in unofficial roles. Prefects, after all, hold some authority, and head boys and girls like Percy Weasley are shown giving instructions, but their roles seem administrative or disciplinary, not academic. They patrol corridors, assist with logistics, and act as liaisons between students and staff. At no point is Hermione, arguably the most academically gifted student in her year, asked to tutor or assist with grading. Not even Ravenclaws, the supposed paragons of scholastic excellence, are ever shown helping teachers in any capacity. Even the astronomy tower, which demands both a nighttime schedule and a keen eye for detail, is staffed by a single teacher, Professor Sinistra, whom we barely glimpse. There is no mention of aides to set up telescopes, monitor students, or track observations. Are students left entirely to their own devices? Are professors superhumanly capable of being everywhere at once? Or is there an invisible force at play? The closest Hogwarts comes to delegating menial tasks is its silent reliance on house elves. These creatures are shown cleaning the castle, cooking meals, and maintaining the dormitories. In the Goblet of Fire, Hermione discovers them working in the kitchens, and Dobby later becomes employed to assist with laundry. But is it possible that house elves also help professors behind the scenes? Do they silently distribute graded parchments, organize books, or even monitor student behavior under invisibility charms? Such a thought is unsettling, especially given the elves' lack of autonomy and their magical capabilities, which are considerable. If house elves are secretly managing parts of Hogwarts' academic machine, it adds a layer of dark irony to the school's prestige. The supposedly noble professors, paragons of magical wisdom, might be quietly leaning on an unpaid and enslaved workforce to keep their lesson plans afloat. Consider Professor Flitwick, for example, a master of charms who also serves as the school's choir director. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, he's seen conducting a choir with enchanted frogs. How does he have the time to teach, grade, prepare lesson plans, and manage extracurriculars without collapsing from exhaustion? The answer may lie in enchantment. Perhaps Hogwarts has built-in magical systems that reduce workloads. Classrooms may be enchanted to transcribe notes, sort papers, or even record student progress. The staircases shift on their own, portraits communicate between floors, and the library shelves reorder themselves. Could the classrooms themselves act as assistants? Perhaps McGonagall has charmed her chalk to write lecture notes on its own, or maybe Snape has trained the dungeon walls to listen and remember everything said during class. Yet even magic has its limits. In the Order of the Phoenix, Professor Umbridge bans practical defensive spells, forcing students to read theory instead. Their resulting lack of preparation proves how essential hands-on learning is. Magic cannot replace a living, responsive teacher or assistant. When Harry founds Dumbledore's army, the students flourish under peer-to-peer instruction. It's one of the rare instances where Hogwarts embraces a collaborative teaching model, albeit in secret and under threat of punishment. There is also the matter of student discipline, detentions, and feedback. Every essay marked with a dreadful or troll grade must be accompanied by an explanation. In the Muggle world, this task is often distributed among a team of graders. At Hogwarts, however, it falls entirely to the professors, who must also manage detentions that range from cleaning trophy rooms to regrowing bones. In the Chamber of Secrets, Lockhart sends Harry to help him answer fan mail during detention. While comically absurd, this shows that even the most frivolous of professors must oversee consequences alone. Number 16. Who monitors their mental well-being? In the hallowed, creaking halls of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where portraits gossip and staircases have a will of their own, a curious silence lingers not in the dungeons or towers, but in the minds of its adult inhabitants. For all the protective spells cast around its stone walls, there is one enchantment suspiciously absent, that of emotional care for its staff. The professors at Hogwarts are left to navigate not just magical disasters, but deep personal traumas, unspoken grief, and psychological burdens, all while managing a castle full of hormonal, reckless teenagers. Nowhere in the castle is there mention of a counselor, therapist, or even a structured support system for the mental health of its educators. For instance, the curious case of Professor Sybil Trelawney, who spends most of her days hidden among incense smoke, crystal balls, and ominous mutterings about death. She is not simply eccentric, she is deeply isolated. Dismissed by most of her colleagues, including the stern Professor McGonagall, who once remarked, "Divination is one of the most imprecise branches of magic," Trelawney is left to languish in her tower. Her self-worth hinges almost entirely on her prophecies, two of which had genuine impact. And even then, she was not aware she made one of them. Her bouts of hysteria and theatrical sobbing are not mere quirks. They are signs of someone desperate to be seen, validated, and protected. Yet no one seems to notice, let alone intervene. Professor Severus Snape, perhaps the most psychologically complex figure in the entire series, embodies a different response to chronic emotional neglect. From his first appearance, Snape exudes resentment, sarcasm, and a cold hostility that borders on cruelty. "You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion-making," he tells his students in their very first lesson. But beneath his polished monologue lies a barely concealed bitterness. This is a man who has spent his life in the shadows, rejected by peers, abused at home, manipulated by Dumbledore, and forever haunted by the memory of Lily Evans. Instead of being offered support or healing, he is handed a classroom of children, including the son of the man who bullied him and the woman he loved. His sarcasm is a shield, his cruelty a cry for help. But Hogwarts offers no salve for this. Then there is Rubeus Hagrid, the warm-hearted half-giant who teaches care of magical creatures. Beneath his jolly exterior lies a man shaped by decades of rejection and sorrow. Expelled from Hogwarts under false accusations, orphaned at a young age, and constantly mocked for his size and speech, Hagrid finds solace only in his creatures, many of which are dangerous enough to kill a grown wizard. His fondness for alcohol, frequently shown through his trips to the Hog's Head and the frequent mention of a little something to warm up, suggests a man self-medicating to soothe unhealed wounds. During the Triwizard Tournament, he vanishes after learning that Rita Skeeter has exposed his giant heritage. He doesn't fight back. He hides. It is telling that none of his colleagues seem to offer him professional help. Only Harry and his friends try to comfort him. The castle is full of broken souls cloaked in authority. Professor Remus Lupin, universally admired by his students for his kindness and brilliance, is another prime example of internalized pain gone unnoticed. Cursed with lycanthropy from childhood, Lupin's entire life is shaped by shame and fear. His resignation from Hogwarts, prompted by the public revelation of his condition, is met with quiet resignation, not protest or institutional defense. "Dumbledore has already risked much by employing me," he says, a line soaked in self-loathing and acceptance of society's rejection. But where is the support structure that could remind him of his value? Nowhere. Hogwarts opens its doors to his talents, but not to his trauma. Even Alastor Moody, or at least the imposter, Barty Crouch Jr. pretending to be him, offers an unintentional commentary on the psychological toll of being a constant warrior. The real Moody is known for his paranoia and erratic behavior, so much so that no one finds it unusual when the faux Moody becomes unhinged. Constant vigilance is his catchphrase, and it serves as both a battle cry and a warning, but living in such a heightened state of alertness, always expecting betrayal or attack, is exhausting. The fact that he is eventually overpowered and imprisoned in a magical trunk for almost a year, and no one notices, raises serious questions about how little attention is paid to the well-being of the staff, especially those with known vulnerabilities. Dolores Umbridge, though largely portrayed as a villain, represents another byproduct of unchecked psychological dysfunction within magical institutions. Her obsession with order, control, and punishment masks an insidious need for dominance, likely born from years of resentment and internalized self-hatred. Her cruelty is not an accident. It is cultivated, institutionalized, and given a position of power. At Hogwarts, she is never required to justify her pedagogical methods or her enjoyment of student suffering. No one evaluates her psychological suitability for teaching, and this is the point. In Hogwarts, a teacher can be sadistic or shattered, and there will be no intervention, only silence. Number 17. What are the boundaries between teachers and students? In the winding corridors of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, relationships between students and teachers have always danced on a delicate edge. The castle, with its secrets and shadows, was more than just a school. It was a world unto itself where young minds were shaped not only by books and spells, but also by the very people entrusted to guide them. While it was never openly discussed, the nature of these relationships often reflected something deeper: power, trust, admiration, and in some cases, something dangerously close to emotional dependency. Professor Remus Lupin, worn and gentle, arrived at Hogwarts in Harry's third year like a quiet sigh of relief. He was everything a mentor should be: wise, kind, and fiercely protective. Harry found in Lupin not just a teacher of defensive magic, but a fragment of the father he never had. When Lupin taught Harry the Patronus charm to ward off Dementors, it wasn't merely an academic lesson, it was an act of emotional rescue. Harry later recalled that Professor Lupin looked at him with a mixture of pride and sadness, a moment that encapsulated their bond. But the question arises, where does this closeness stop being mentorship and become something else, something the student comes to rely on too much? Lupin's guidance filled a void in Harry's life, but such emotional proximity brings inherent risks. Hogwarts, as a boarding school, lacks parental oversight, and in the vacuum of absent families, teachers often become surrogate figures. This might work in the case of Lupin, whose ethics and compassion were never in question, but it becomes murky with someone like Severus Snape. The Potions Master's relationship with Harry was not just complex, it was combative, bruising, and deeply personal. Snape saw James Potter in Harry's face and punished him for sins that weren't his. But he also protected him in ways Harry never understood until much later. "Don't call me coward," Snape snarled when questioned by Harry, his voice soaked with pain. This was not a teacher disciplining a student. It was a man unraveling from years of repressed emotion. Snape's dual role, as protector and tormentor, highlights the lack of regulation in teacher-student relationships at Hogwarts. While the Ministry of Magic likely imposed some official standards, within the castle walls the headmaster seemed to rely more on trust and intuition than on formal guidelines. Albus Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard of his age, rarely interfered in these personal dynamics unless absolutely necessary. His famous line, "I make mistakes like the next man," in fact being forgive me, and rather cleverer than most men, my mistakes tend to be correspondingly huger, suggests a man who recognized his own blind spots. One of those blind spots was surely Snape's. Unchecked behavior towards students, especially Harry. This inconsistency is not just a reflection of Dumbledore's leadership, but of the school itself. Hogwarts never appears to have formalized any code of conduct regarding how close a professor could or should become to their students. In Muggle schools, there are clear boundaries and policies designed to protect both parties. At Hogwarts, it seems to be a matter of personal conscience. In Lupin's case, that worked. In Snape's, it created years of emotional damage. One wonders if there was ever any training offered to professors on child psychology or pastoral care. Judging by how easily someone like Dolores Umbridge gained power and abused it, the answer seems clear. Umbridge's tenure brought the issue to the forefront in a grotesque way. Her sadistic punishments, like making Harry carve words into his own skin, crossed every imaginable line. "I must not tell lies," he wrote again and again, blood dripping from his hand. And yet no one stopped her. The Ministry backed her. Dumbledore, for political reasons, remained distant. Even the other professors, many of whom loathed her, stood by helplessly. If physical abuse is forbidden, then why was Umbridge allowed to leave scars? Her actions exposed just how fragile the ethical framework of Hogwarts truly was. It wasn't a question of policy, it was a question of who held power. But not all emotional bonds were unhealthy. Take Minerva McGonagall, for instance. Stern and by the book, she nonetheless showed a deep maternal instinct toward her students, especially Harry. When she gave him permission to enter the Triwizard Tournament despite her reservations, she did so with visible concern. "I will be ensuring that Mr. Potter's safety is your highest priority," she told Barty Crouch Jr., then disguised as Moody. McGonagall walked the line between authority and empathy with grace, always careful never to let her emotions cloud her judgment. Perhaps she represents the ideal Hogwarts professor, someone who cares, but from a distance. Yet even she was limited in what she could prevent. The Triwizard Tournament itself was a dangerous farce, exposing students to lethal threats with little oversight. No one seemed to question the ethics of allowing teenagers to risk their lives for sport. What kind of environment places glory over safety? It's another example of the school's blurred boundaries between challenge and cruelty, between mentorship and manipulation. Barty Crouch Jr., masquerading as a teacher, manipulated Harry under the guise of guidance, showing just how easily the system could be twisted. One might also reflect on Gilderoy Lockhart, whose entire persona was a lie. He played the role of a charming instructor, but used his position to inflate his ego and endanger students. His incompetence nearly erased all the bones from Harry's arm, and he attempted to wipe the memories of 2 students. Was there no screening process? No accountability? His tenure further reveals how Hogwarts prioritizes reputation over regulation. A teacher's popularity or pedigree often mattered more than their ability to responsibly shape young lives. Number 18, what happens to retired teachers? At Hogwarts, time seems to stand still. The portraits on the walls whisper ancient secrets, ghosts drift through the corridors in endless routine, and some professors appear so ageless that one begins to question whether retirement is even a concept within those stone walls. Professor McGonagall, stern and unyielding, remains as sharp in Harry's 5th year as she was when he first laid eyes on her during the sorting ceremony. Her crisp tone and steel-like presence never waver. But what happens to professors like her when age, at long last, begins to whisper in their ears? Do they leave their wands on their desks and walk out of the castle one final time? Or does Hogwarts never truly let them go? There is no mention of a retirement plan in the entire series. Not once does a character refer to a teacher taking leave for good, choosing peace over potion fumes, or a quiet village over the chaos of the Great Hall. It's as though once someone is a part of the Hogwarts staff, they are there forever. Professor Binns is perhaps the most unsettling proof of this. The man literally died, and continued teaching. According to Professor McGonagall in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, he simply got up to teach the next day and left his body behind him. It wasn't until students noticed he could drift through blackboards that they realized something had changed. Yet no one questioned it. No one replaced him. The ghost just carried on as if nothing had happened. The lack of turnover is glaring. In the Muggle world, even the most passionate teachers eventually hang up their chalk. They retire, travel, or take up gardening. But at Hogwarts there is an eerie permanence. Professor Sprout, head of Hufflepuff and devoted herbology expert, is already older when Harry first meets her. She is described as a little squat witch with flyaway grey hair. And yet she continues working tirelessly in the greenhouses year after year, regardless of storms or student disasters. Does she not dream of settling into a cottage surrounded by blooming pufferpods and enchanted tulips? Or is there some invisible contract keeping her rooted in the soil of Hogwarts? Even more curious is the fate of Professor Flitwick. The Charms Master is a half-goblin with immense magical knowledge, once a dueling champion in his youth. He's kind, witty, and much beloved by Ravenclaws, but he, too, shows signs of age. His high-pitched voice and short stature make him an odd but endearing fixture of the castle. Over the years he becomes visibly more fragile, even fainting during one of the Death Eater invasions. Still, there is no talk of him stepping down, of passing the wand to a younger protégé. His charm-filled classroom remains his domain. It's as if age simply doesn't matter here, only loyalty does. Hogwarts seems to operate under its own mystical logic, one untouched by the realities of time. The idea of a pension fund feels laughably out of place. There are no staff meetings discussing benefits, no mention of a magical union protecting aging professors' rights. Even Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard of his time, remained headmaster until his tragic death. He never chose to retire, not even as his beard grew longer and his body more frail. He faced unspeakable burdens, bore the secrets of the wizarding world, and never once considered handing over the keys to the castle. The truth may lie not in policy, but in culture. Hogwarts professors are not just educators, they are guardians of a magical legacy. Their work is not a job, but a calling, one that binds them to the castle in a deeper, perhaps magical way. The school itself might refuse to let them go. Consider the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall, the moving staircases, the Room of Requirement. It's a place built on sentient magic. What if it holds on to its inhabitants as tightly as it does its traditions? There is no mention of a retirement party, no farewell feast with speeches and golden goblets. When a teacher disappears, it's either due to death or disaster. Take Professor Kettleburn, the predecessor to Hagrid in the care of magical creatures. He is the only professor explicitly said to have retired to enjoy more time with his remaining limbs, as Dumbledore dryly remarks. But even his departure is wrapped in humour and injury, not peace or gratitude. No one asks where he went, how he's doing, or if he's happy. He simply vanishes from the narrative, a footnote in Hogwarts history. And then there's Hagrid. Though not technically a professor by traditional standards, his role as keeper of keys and grounds is vital. Despite being attacked by the ministry, demoted, and even nearly killed, Hagrid never once expresses a desire to leave. His hut, his pumpkins, and his beloved beasts are his life. Would Hagrid even know how to retire? Could he bear to leave the forbidden forest behind, to silence the call of a dragon's roar or a hippogriff's cry? His loyalty to Hogwarts is absolute, forged in love and loss. Retirement for someone like him would be an act of betrayal. But what if the castle does have a system hidden from view? A secret room where retired professors gather, sipping fire whiskey and recalling mischievous students from decades past. Perhaps there is a portrait gallery where former staff reside, offering advice to the current generation. Maybe McGonagall, one day, will sit beside Dumbledore's frame, nodding sagely as the next headmistress paces before her. It's not hard to imagine a hidden network of magical correspondence, letters charmed to arrive only in retirement, inviting professors to a secluded retreat somewhere in the Scottish Highlands. Still, the absence of any concrete plan casts a shadow. The possibility that Hogwarts might chew up its educators, demanding their service until death or worse, is unsettling. Does the wizarding world consider such sacrifice noble, even honourable? Is there a quiet expectation that those who teach magic must be consumed by it? Perhaps that is why so few question it. Even the students seem to accept the eternal presence of their professors, never asking what happens when they're gone. It's also worth noting the role of ghosts. Could Hogwarts be subtly encouraging staff to linger in spectral form? Professor Binns is not treated as an anomaly, just another part of the school's odd tapestry. What if retirement isn't expected to be lived in the traditional sense but continued in death? The idea chills the spine, a school so attached to its staff that it cannot release them, even after life ends. Would this fate be offered to others? Could Flitwick, Sprout, or even McGonagall become the next ghostly guides forever bound to their classrooms? And yet, despite all this, Hogwarts remains a place of wonder. Perhaps the sacrifice is willing. These professors are not mere mortals clocking in hours. They are scholars, warriors, mentors, protectors. They stood between Voldemort and the children. They guarded the secrets of ancient spells and dangerous creatures. In the Battle of Hogwarts, they did not flee. They fought. Their service was total. To them, the school is more than a workplace. It is their life's purpose, their heart's home. But one can't help wondering what might have been if the system allowed softness. If McGonagall, after Voldemort's fall, could retire to a home by the sea, knitting tartan scarves and sipping tea. If Flitwick could return to competitive dueling or write a memoir on the artistry of charm work. If Sprout could turn her greenhouse into a public conservatory. These lives, full of wisdom and magic, deserve more than a chalk-stained end. Instead, we are left with silence. The final fate of Hogwarts professors is never told. They vanish into history, into legends and memories, their sacrifices unmarked, their legacy carried not in pensions or plaques, but in the hearts of the students they shaped. Perhaps in the end, that is the true retirement for a Hogwarts professor, not rest, but remembrance. Number 19, who trains professors in teaching methods? No one ever explained how a talented wizard automatically becomes a competent teacher, and Hogwarts, the most prestigious magical school in Britain, seems oddly relaxed about this matter. When we look at the roster of professors through Harry Potter's 7 years, we see a troubling pattern emerge. Being brilliant at magic doesn't make one brilliant at teaching. In fact, most professors seem to have been thrown directly into the classroom without training, supervision, or even a handbook. Where does a Hogwarts teacher learn to be a teacher? There is no mention of a magical pedagogical faculty, no signs of internship programs, and no support systems for new staff. The job appears to come with prestige and absolute autonomy, at no preparation. Take Gilderoy Lockhart, for instance, a name that still sends shivers down the spine of any student who suffered through his disastrous year as a defense against the dark arts teacher. Lockhart may have been famous, glamorous, and published, but in the classroom he was a walking catastrophe. He could barely control his own wand, let alone a classroom full of students. When he released a cage of Cornish pixies in his very first lesson, he stood helpless as chaos unfolded, smiling nervously and eventually fleeing the room. "I must ask you not to scream," he told them, seconds before pixies began hurling books and pulling hair. It was clear he had no idea how to handle a classroom or maintain authority. His appointment was nothing short of irresponsible, a cruel joke on the students who had to endure his antics. Lockhart, however, was not an exception. He was just the most flamboyant example. Others, like Quirinus Quirrell, came with theoretical knowledge but little practical skill. his nervous stutter, his inability to control a class, and his visible fear of his own subject matter turned every lesson into an exercise in discomfort. Students learned quickly that Quirrell was not someone who could offer them guidance, structure, or safety. He was, in essence, a man with a title but no tools. His year at Hogwarts ended in disaster, not only because he was secretly hosting Voldemort on the back of his head, but because from a pedagogical standpoint he had been doomed from the start. Then there was Severus Snape, a brilliant potion maker, an accomplished wizard, and arguably one of the most talented magical minds at Hogwarts. But was he a good teacher? The answer is painfully clear, no. From the very first potions class, Snape showed open favoritism towards Slytherins, humiliation tactics towards students he disliked, especially Neville Longbottom and Harry Potter, and a profound lack of interest in inspiring a love for the subject. "You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion making," he declared with icy precision. But what followed was not science or art. It was fear, confusion, and resentment. Snape's lessons were devoid of encouragement. There was no attempt to differentiate teaching methods, no indication he cared whether students learned anything or merely survived the hour without breaking into tears. Even professors who were beloved, like Rubeus Hagrid, struggled immensely. When Hagrid became the care of magical creatures teacher in Harry's third year, he brought with him genuine love for magical creatures, but no understanding of curriculum planning or classroom safety. His very first lesson introduced students to hippogriffs, creatures with sharp talons, dangerous pride, and the ability to kill if slighted. Malfoy was injured that day, not mortally, but enough to cause chaos, lawsuits, and weeks of administrative headaches. Hagrid had meant well, but he had never been trained. He didn't know how to structure learning objectives, assess student readiness, or scaffold lessons. All he had was passion, and while passion is a vital part of good teaching, it is not enough on its own. Minerva McGonagall, head of Gryffindor and deputy headmistress, may have been the closest Hogwarts had to a competent educator. Her transfiguration classes were rigorous, fair, and structured. She demanded discipline, but she was also consistent and clear. She did not humiliate students, she corrected them. She managed to strike a balance between high expectations and genuine support. Yet even with McGonagall, there is no mention that she was trained in the methodology of teaching. We never hear of her attending a pedagogical academy, or of her mentoring new staff in how to manage a classroom. If McGonagall was a good teacher, it was not because the school prepared her. It was because she had a natural aptitude and perhaps a strong sense of justice. But Hogwarts could not afford to rely on instincts alone. Sybil Trelawney, the divination professor, was another example of a gifted witch placed in the wrong role. Trelawney was eccentric and heavily invested in the mystique of her subject. Her classroom was more of a séance parlour than a place of learning. She spoke in riddles, frightened students with dubious death predictions, and showed no skill in fostering critical thinking. "My dear, you have the grim," she would whisper, delighting in the drama. Yet few students actually learned divination under her. Hermione, ever the rational learner, dropped the subject in frustration. There was no structure, no clarity, no feedback. Trelawney had no idea how to engage different types of learners or how to develop skills over time. She performed, but she didn't teach. Dolores Umbridge, despite her administrative background, was perhaps the most terrifying case of all. She had authority, she had rules, but she had no interest in actual pedagogy. Her lessons consisted of reading the textbook silently. She banned practical magic and punished curiosity. Under her rule, education became a tool for control, not enlightenment. "You will not need wands," she declared, effectively undermining the very foundation of magical learning. In her presence, students did not learn to think, question, or explore. They learned to obey or be punished. The silence in her classroom was not discipline, it was fear. And yet no one at Hogwarts stopped her. No one asked if she had been trained to teach. They simply let her rule. What is most alarming is that no infrastructure seems to exist within the school to guide or supervise teachers. There is no head of teacher development, no professional learning community, no evaluations or peer feedback. Teachers appear to be hired or placed and left entirely to their own devices. How they grade, what they teach, how they discipline, it's all up to them. This inconsistency means that students experience radical changes from one class to another with no guarantee of continuity or fairness. Neville Longbottom, who cowered in Snape's dungeon, thrived in Professor Sprout's greenhouses, but what if every class had been like potions? The magical world seems to assume that being good at magic automatically makes one a good teacher. But this belief is deeply flawed. The ability to cast a charm does not teach you how to explain it. Being able to produce a Patronus does not mean you can help a student understand why they can't. Pedagogy is its own craft, one that requires training, reflection, and constant growth. In the Muggle world, teachers go through years of preparation, including theory, practicum, and supervised teaching. Where is the magical equivalent? Do wizarding universities exist for educators? We never hear of them. Do teachers attend conferences or workshops on classroom management? Highly unlikely, given the state of affairs at Hogwarts. It is possible that such training exists somewhere off-page, hidden in the margins of the magical world. Perhaps there is a branch of the Ministry of Magic responsible for educational standards, but if so, it is woefully ineffective. The Hogwarts curriculum changes yearly depending on who is teaching. Students are constantly adapting to new styles, new materials, new expectations. The Defense Against the Dark Arts post is the worst example. A cursed position that sees new hires every year, each bringing wildly different philosophies, abilities, and teaching quality. How can students possibly build foundational skills in a subject when every year is a restart? Even Albus Dumbledore, one of the greatest wizards of the age, did little to address this instability. He was often hands-off, allowing teachers full autonomy. He trusted in their magical ability and perhaps their moral character, but he never appeared to require any standard of teaching ability. His failure to intervene in Lockhart's hiring, in Umbridge's oppressive methods, or even in Trelawney's nonsense, suggests a system that places no value on educational methodology. Dumbledore, brilliant as he was, seemed to believe that Hogwarts was more a moral battleground than an academic institution. Learning came secondary to character formation. Ultimately, the question lingers like an unspoken spell in the hallways of the castle. Who trains the teachers at Hogwarts? The silence on this topic is deafening. Students are expected to become competent witches and wizards, but their success depends almost entirely on the luck of the draw. Will they get a McGonagall or a Lockhart? Will their professor care? Will they even know how to teach? In a world where education shapes magical ability, these are not small questions. They are foundational. They deserve answers. And until the magical world acknowledges that teaching is not innate, that it is a learned, complex skill, Hogwarts will remain a place of wonder, but also of deep, systemic neglect. Number 20. Are there regular staff meetings or... In a castle as vast and peculiar as Hogwarts, where portraits argue and staircases have moods, one might assume that the staff would require regular meetings just to keep the chaos manageable. Yet the books remain strangely silent about formal teachers' conferences. We hear of no scheduled staff briefings, no agenda passed down for review, and certainly no meeting room filled with frustrated professors sipping pumpkin juice while debating if the Forbidden Forest should remain forbidden. The absence of any mention suggests either that J.K. Rowling chose to omit such mundane bureaucracy, or, more intriguingly, that Hogwarts operates on something entirely different, a kind of magical intuition or even organized chaos. Still, even a school where staircases shift must have someone deciding who gets detention and who doesn't. It's impossible to imagine Minerva McGonagall, deputy headmistress and stern guardian of Gryffindor House, not advocating for some order behind the scenes. Her character exudes discipline. She knows every student by name, every rule by heart, and every boundary by instinct. It stands to reason that she would insist on periodic meetings to discuss critical matters like Quidditch schedules clashing with OWL preparations, or why Hagrid continues introducing illegal creatures into the syllabus, and yet the only gathering of teachers we explicitly witness is ad hoc and urgent, such as when Harry's name is pulled from the Goblet of Fire. That meeting in Dumbledore's office is reactive, not procedural. No minutes were taken. No action items reviewed. Dumbledore himself complicates the question. As headmaster, he possesses an air of omniscience and detachment. One suspects he sees more than he lets on and speaks less than he knows. A traditional administrator might insist on bi-weekly staff reviews, but Dumbledore allows things to unfold. When a troll is loose in the dungeon, he doesn't convene the staff. He makes an announcement and disappears. His methods are less managerial, more mystical. Perhaps that's why Hogwarts has survived so many attacks. It flows like a living organism, adapting rather than organizing. Still, even organisms require a brain, a system, a rhythm. Does Dumbledore run secret staff meetings off-page, or does he delegate everything to McGonagall while he tends to matters of life, death, and lemon drops? We see glimpses of staff collaboration when professors unite to protect the Sorcerer's Stone or to fortify the castle in the Battle of Hogwarts, but these are emergencies, not routine operations. What about when Seamus Finnegan blows up his cauldron 3 times a week, or when Fred and George flood a hallway with portable swamps? Are these incidents discussed during quiet, candlelit evenings in the staff room over cups of strong tea and suppressed laughter? Or are they simply logged silently in each professor's mind, never coordinated or shared? Snape, of course, would resist such gatherings. The potions master rarely pretends to enjoy company. He thrives in solitude and scorn. If there were meetings, one imagines he'd arrive late, arms crossed, robes billowing, ready to dismiss every concern with a single raise of his eyebrow. He'd scoff at Flitwick's enthusiasm, interrupt Trelawney's visions, and glare at Sprout's concerns over deviant mandrakes. If forced to attend, he'd sit in a corner, saying little, absorbing everything, and contributing only to correct someone's grammar or magical theory. But despite his abrasive presence, Snape is a cornerstone of the school's stability. His refusal to participate in open collaboration might just be part of a deeper game. He prefers control, not consensus. And what of the lesser-known faculty? Professor Binns, the ghostly history of magic teacher, likely hasn't attended a staff meeting since he died. He's barely aware he's dead, let alone that he's part of a team. Trelawney, ensconced in her tower of incense and sherry, might only show up if her inner eye compelled her. Firenze, the centaur, would probably reject the very notion of meetings, considering them a human triviality. Hagrid would bring Fang and spill tea on the parchment agenda. It's hard to picture such a group achieving anything beyond a brief argument and a collective sigh. There's also the question of discipline. Who decides on student punishment? When Draco Malfoy levitates a snake at Harry during the dueling club, who reviews that incident? When Sirius Black breaks into Gryffindor Tower, nearly beheading the fat lady, do the professors huddle afterward to debrief, or does everyone just shrug, accept that life at Hogwarts is perilous, and hope for the best? Even Filch, the cantankerous caretaker, seems to operate independently, always hoping for a return to corporal punishment. Surely someone must be coordinating with him, or perhaps they all just quietly ignore him. In Order of the Phoenix, we are given a rare glimpse into organized staff resistance. Dumbledore's army is born because the professors can't openly oppose Dolores Umbridge. But even then, coordination is discreet, not overt. McGonagall gives cryptic advice. Flitwick shrugs and pretends to be harmless. Hagrid vanishes. No scene describes them rallying in secret, charting strategies on chalkboards. The staff becomes a quiet rebellion, each in their corner, resisting in their own way, but no one calls a meeting. No one leads a plan. Is that Hogwarts at its core a loose alliance of brilliant minds united only when everything's on fire? The house system itself creates division rather than cohesion. Heads of houses operate like miniature rulers in their own territories. McGonagall governs Gryffindor with firm but fair resolve. Snape guards Slytherin with pride and paranoia. Sprout tends to Hufflepuff like a beloved garden. Flitwick cheers on Ravenclaw with whimsical delight. But when do these leaders meet? Who moderates the tensions between them? Who calms Snape after another round of points deducted from Gryffindor? Is there a quarterly House Harmony Committee, or do they all just bark at each other across the Great Hall and let the resentment simmer? Even student performance is mysteriously handled. In Muggle schools, teachers report grades, hold conferences, compare notes. At Hogwarts, we know grades exist. OWLs and NEWTs are heavily emphasized, but who tracks day-to-day progress? Does Professor Vector send a memo to McGonagall when Hermione answers too many questions? Does Snape ever notify anyone that Neville's potion exploded again? The only clue we get is from Half-Blood Prince, where McGonagall reviews Harry's grades to approve his course schedule. But even then it's private, not collective. Perhaps the most damning absence of staff meetings is evident in their inability to foresee danger. Time and again, threats rise inside the castle, the basilisk in the plumbing, a werewolf teaching defense, a possessed student writing messages in blood. Would regular teacher conferences have prevented these events? Could a staff-wide check-in have revealed that Quirrell wore a dark lord under his turban? Might someone have connected the dots if they'd only talked? Or is Hogwarts intentionally designed to teach through risk, chaos, and the painful lessons of trial and error? The idea of magical academia without meetings might sound enchanting at first. But magic doesn't excuse logistics. Someone must be overseeing curriculum development, spell safety protocols, even the logistics of the Yule Ball. We're told McGonagall handles ball coordination, but who approves the venue, the security measures, the decorations? When Flitwick charms the Great Hall to resemble a starlit sky, is that spontaneous artistry or the result of a long-forgotten atmospheric design committee? Only once do we hear of the staff being formally gathered before students. In Chamber of Secrets, after the petrification attacks, Dumbledore stands before them to say, "You will find that I will only truly have left this school when none here are loyal to me." But even then, it's not a meeting, it's a farewell. And the moment reveals everything. In times of crisis, Hogwarts either falls apart or comes alive, depending on who's watching. That's not structure, that's survival. So, do staff meetings exist at Hogwarts? Perhaps. But if they do, they are not meetings in the Muggle sense. They are not timetabled, chaired, or typed into memos. They are moments, brief, intense, emotional exchanges behind closed doors, in hallways, in common rooms where instinct overrides protocol. Maybe that's the Hogwarts way, but one must wonder if even magic could benefit from the occasional spreadsheet. And yet there's something romantic about the idea that Hogwarts operates without formal planning. It suggests that the professors, eccentric, flawed, brilliant, trust each other enough to keep the school running through sheer will, intuition, and centuries of tradition. But it also implies risk, and if there's anything Hogwarts has taught us, it's that risk is a lesson in itself. Whether or not the staff ever meets, the students are the ones who pay the price for silence. And perhaps that's the real magic of Hogwarts, not that it runs perfectly, but that it runs at all. Number 21. What happens to the subject when a teacher dies or leaves? In Hogwarts, where staircases move and portraits talk, one mystery remains more stubborn than Peeves with a water balloon. What happens to a subject when its professor is suddenly removed, whether by death, dismissal, or some even darker fate? The castle has seen its fair share of chaos, and in many cases the teachers fall victim to the very forces they are meant to educate students about. Yet no curriculum adjustment is ever truly explained. Do lessons simply vanish into the forbidden forest? Or does some invisible hand reshuffle the academic responsibilities? In the case of the ever-cursed subject Defense Against the Dark Arts, this question has become not just curious but vital. Each year, Hogwarts students brace themselves for yet another new defense against the dark arts teacher, and each year the circumstances grow more bizarre. In Harry's very first year, Professor Quirrell, a stammering man with a suspicious turban, turned out to be hosting Lord Voldemort on the back of his head. When he perished at the end of the year, reduced to ashes by his attempt to harm Harry, no one questioned what became of his curriculum. Who, if anyone, stepped in to revise the exam? Were the students' grades simply waived, or did Minerva McGonagall quietly transfigure herself into a substitute? The following year, Gilderoy Lockhart took over, a man more obsessed with his own reflection than any actual defence. He was an incompetent fraud who erased others' memories and passed off their heroic tales as his own. By the end of the year, a backfiring memory charm left him permanently damaged. Once again, no explanation was offered for the remainder of the academic year. "My memory's gone!" Lockhart exclaimed cheerfully in the hospital wing, and perhaps so too did the memory of who was now in charge of teaching defensive spells to the rest of the school. Remus Lupin brought hope and competence in the third year. Beloved by students, his lessons were practical, his attitude kind, and his werewolf nature unknown to most. But at the end of the year, thanks to Severus Snape's interference, Lupin resigned. One moment students were learning to repel boggarts with laughter, and the next the classroom was silent. Did Dumbledore fill the gap with anyone else for the final weeks? There's no mention of a substitute. The academic thread simply snaps, as if defense against the dark arts is a cursed storyline. The narrative itself can't continue. Then came Mad-Eye Moody, or rather Barty Crouch Jr., using Polyjuice Potion to impersonate him. That year's education was not just irregular, but criminal. Students learned under a Death Eater pretending to be an aura. The ethics of what was taught, unforgivable curses on spiders and even the students themselves, went unchecked. "You need to know what you're up against," he claimed, but when his disguise was revealed, the administration again failed to address the matter publicly. Did the school issue a correction, an apology, a revised syllabus? No. By the time the real Moody was rescued, it was too late to evaluate what his class had actually learned, if anything at all. In the fifth year, the Ministry's iron grip placed Dolores Umbridge in the position. A woman more interested in pink cardigans and power than any real teaching, Umbridge banned practical magic altogether. "You will not be needing wands," she declared, turning the classroom into a prison of theory. Students like Harry were forced to take education into their own hands, forming Dumbledore's army in secret to learn what Umbridge refused to teach. The question lingers, was there a backup plan? Was the rest of the staff expected to compensate for the damage done to an entire year's worth of defensive training? When Snape finally got the defense position in Harry's sixth year, he brought competence, but also cruelty. His lessons were precise and harsh, built around the darkness he himself had barely survived. He taught the class how to cast nonverbal spells and shield charms, yet his loyalties were ambiguous. When he fled the castle after killing Dumbledore, there is no record of who took over the subject in the final weeks. Were seventh years preparing for newts in chaos? Or was the course quietly suspended in the wake of crisis? During the final year, under Death Eater control, Amicus Carrow was placed in charge and turned defense against the dark arts into dark arts itself. Students were forced to learn Cruciatus and other vile spells, not as defense, but as weapons. "They made me do it," Neville Longbottom would later say, after being punished for resisting. In this case, the subject was not just mismanaged, it was weaponized. And when Hogwarts was liberated, did the Board of Governors declare the year void? Were records expunged? The question of who teaches what and when is met with a systemic silence. Other subjects have also suffered. When Professor Burbage, the Muggle Studies teacher, was murdered by Voldemort himself, her subject vanished without ceremony. She had been suspended earlier for her progressive views, then reinstated, only to meet a brutal end. The next year, her replacement was no teacher at all, but a Death Eater who taught propaganda. Muggle studies became a tool of hate, yet no indication is given that anyone protested its distortion or tried to restore its integrity. The problem goes beyond defense. In the second year, Professor Sprout was temporarily incapacitated after a Whomping Willow incident, and yet herbology continued without hiccup. In third year, Hagrid's abrupt absence due to Buckbeak's trial resulted in Professor Grubbly Plank stepping in smoothly. So the system can function when it wants to, but for some reason, defense against the dark arts remains uniquely broken, subject to the whims of fate, administration, and dark forces alike. The castle itself seems complicit. When Umbridge is attacked by centaurs and never returns, no mention is made of a temporary replacement. The subject simply evaporates. When Lupin resigns, no one fills his chair. The position has become a kind of academic ghost haunting Hogwarts more than any of its poltergeists. This recurring instability has deep effects on the students, many of whom face mortal danger without proper training. "We've got to be able to defend ourselves," Hermione once said, and yet the very institution meant to ensure that fails them at every turn. Even more baffling is the absence of administrative accountability. In Muggle schools, when a teacher quits or dies, a substitute is brought in, lesson plans are adjusted, exams rescheduled. Hogwarts, however, runs on a logic all its own. The headmaster, who is ultimately responsible, seems to operate on trust and improvisation. Dumbledore, brilliant though he may be, rarely addresses these educational gaps. McGonagall, strict and orderly, also never intervenes publicly. The question remains, does anyone actually manage the curriculum? The answer might lie in the idea that some subjects are considered expendable. Charms, transfiguration and potions, those endure, always staffed, always taught. But defense against the dark arts, that is a revolving door cursed by Voldemort himself, some say, to ensure no one can hold the position more than a year. This might be a clever narrative device, but in the logic of the wizarding world, it is a catastrophic educational failure. A subject essential to survival has no consistent leadership. When Hogwarts was rebuilt after the war, one can hope that this curse was lifted and stability returned. But even then, who ensured continuity? Did Neville Longbottom, as a professor of herbology, step in? Did the ministry issue new guidelines? Or did the chaos simply continue, brushed under the moving staircases and enchanted ceiling? For a school so revered, the operational mysteries remain unsolved. Students graduate from Hogwarts with wildly different levels of proficiency in defending themselves, some having fought Death Eaters, others knowing little more than theory. This disparity isn't just unfair, it's dangerous. In a world where the dark arts can return at any moment, and where auras are the first line of defense, it is baffling that the primary educational institution can't provide consistency in the very subject that determines survival. The question remains painfully relevant. What happens to a subject when its teacher is lost to fire, treachery, or madness? Who updates the syllabus? Who grades the exams? Who carries the burden forward? Perhaps no one. Perhaps the magic of Hogwarts is not its wonder, but its ability to keep going without ever answering the most important questions. Number 22. Why are there no differentiated courses? At Hogwarts, magic is not only a gift, it is a subject that, for all its wonder, is curiously taught in a rigid, standardized way. Every September, new witches and wizards flood the ancient halls of the castle and are promptly assigned to identical timetables, learning the same spells, reading the same books, and sitting the same exams. But not every student arrives with the same background, talent, or aptitude. One might have grown up in a magical household casting Lumos at the age of 4, while another might be holding a wand for the first time, nervously flipping through the standard book of spells and hoping to make a feather twitch. Yet both are expected to perform identically, and therein lies the problem. Hermione Granger, easily the brightest student of her generation, mastered most first-year material before even stepping on the Hogwarts Express. She memorized entire textbooks, brewed passable potions without guidance, and had already attempted a few rudimentary spells by the time she arrived. When Professor Flitwick began teaching Wingardium Leviosa, Hermione corrected Ron's pronunciation before Flitwick even had the chance. Despite this, Hermione sat through the same introductory lessons week after week, reciting incantations she had long since perfected. Meanwhile, Seamus Finnegan was still making things explode by accident. The question begs to be asked, why must the most advanced students be shackled to the same curriculum as the least experienced? Nowhere is this disparity more glaring than in potions. Professor Snape's lessons were notorious for their harsh atmosphere, but beneath the menace lurked a deeper issue, the lack of differentiated instruction. While Hermione had the precision and patience to follow Snape's meticulous recipes, students like Neville Longbottom floundered. Not because they were lazy or disinterested, Neville genuinely tried, but because potions required a level of careful control that he had not yet developed. Snape, of course, showed no mercy. "Why don't you try and do it right?" he sneered. But there was no remedial course for Neville, no alternative approach, no personal guidance to match his learning style. He was simply tossed into the deep end with the rest, and when he flailed, he was humiliated for it. Imagine if Hogwarts had something as mundane as a basic spellcasting class for first years who'd never held a wand, or an advanced charms seminar for students like Hermione. Why is it acceptable that a school with moving staircases, talking portraits, and time-turners can't offer tiered coursework? Muggle schools with far less magic at their disposal manage to create individual learning plans. They accommodate students with learning differences, accelerate the gifted, and support the struggling. Hogwarts, on the other hand, runs on a system that assumes all magical children learn the same way, at the same pace. The curriculum never adjusts for magical upbringing either. Draco Malfoy, raised in an elite pureblood family, could duel blindfolded. Dean Thomas didn't even know he was a wizard until his Hogwarts letter arrived. Yet they were placed side by side in defense against the dark arts, instructed to cast Rictus Sempra with the same ease. When Draco excelled and Dean stumbled, was it truly a reflection of talent, or of a system that failed to recognize starting points? Some students came prepared to leap, others needed to learn how to crawl. Hogwarts asked all to sprint. Even magical ability itself varied. Harry Potter had an instinctive connection to defensive spells, partly forged through years of trauma and confrontation. His Patronus charm, mastered at 13, was something adult wizards struggled with. Yet Harry received no advanced training beyond Lupin's tutoring, and even that was informal. Where was the system for identifying and nurturing such raw, situational talent? Instead, Harry's training remained a reaction to crisis. When he needed to teach the DA, he did so not because the school guided him, but because the school abandoned him. What if Hogwarts had seen Harry's aptitude and built a path around it? It is not just about brilliance either. Consider Luna Lovegood. Her magical perspective was eccentric but uniquely insightful. She might not have excelled in traditional spellwork, but her understanding of magical creatures, her intuitive connection to the world around her, hinted at a different kind of intelligence. Did anyone stop to craft a plan tailored to her strengths? Did she receive encouragement in areas she could truly shine? Or was she simply another name on a standardized list, passed through the same funnel, her gifts unnoticed? The teaching staff, for all their power, seemed curiously bound to this archaic model. Professors like McGonagall could transfigure teacups into tortoises, but did not adjust her lessons for struggling students. Her transfiguration classes were rigid and demanding, offering little flexibility. Yet we never saw a supplemental course, an assistant teacher, or any mentoring program. Students either kept up or they failed in silence. Hogwarts, for all its grandeur, had no system of scaffolding, no safety net. Take the case of Fred and George Weasley. Neither brother was a model student in the traditional sense. They cared little for exams or coursework. But their inventions, skiving snack boxes, extendable ears, and portable swamps, were masterpieces of magical innovation. Where was the course on magical entrepreneurship? Where was the professor to say, "You may not fit the mold, but your gifts matter"? Instead, the twins left school early, not in disgrace, but in protest. Their brilliance couldn't be boxed, and so they walked away from the box entirely. Even the owls and newts offered no specialization track. Students sat identical exams regardless of personal strengths or aspirations. Hermione, who could have aced a mastery-level charms paper, had to waste her efforts on standard content. Students interested in healing weren't offered advanced medical magic. Future auras weren't offered extra dueling or forensic classes. The school appeared blind to professional preparation. Instead, Hogwarts operated like a conveyor belt: push everyone through, sort them by test scores, and hope for the best. Albus Dumbledore, for all his wisdom, never reformed this structure. His belief in student potential was legendary, yet he never institutionalized pathways to help that potential flourish. He gave Harry private lessons in 6th year, but only to prepare him for war, not for learning's sake. Why weren't gifted students routinely mentored by professors? Why wasn't there a magical equivalent of an honours program? The lack of support wasn't limited to academics. Emotional and psychological challenges were largely ignored. Neville's self-doubt was never addressed until he was placed in situations of forced bravery. He thrived not because Hogwarts saw his potential, but because fate did. A better system might have spotted his insecurities, nurtured his quiet resilience, and allowed him to bloom earlier. Instead, he was left to sink or swim, often in Snape's dungeon, shaking with fear. When Harry used Sectum Sempra on Draco, the incident revealed a dangerous flaw. He had discovered a powerful spell in the Half-Blood Prince's book, learned it without oversight, and cast it unknowingly. No teacher had taught him about the ethics of spellcasting, about restraint, about risk. In a more guided system, there would be an advanced ethics course, or at least magical supervision, for students experimenting beyond the curriculum. Instead, students were on their own, brilliant ones especially. Ultimately, the Hogwarts teaching model assumes that magic itself levels the playing field, that by being magical, students will eventually catch up to each other. But this is a fantasy within a fantasy. Real education demands adaptation, support, and vision. Magic, like any tool, must be shaped by the hands that wield it. Not all hands are the same. Some shake, some glow, some build. Hogwarts remains a place of wonder, but also of wasted talent, wasted opportunity. For every Hermione forced to repeat lessons she long mastered, there is a Neville silently struggling to stay afloat. For every Fred and George who invent a world of their own, there is a Luna whose world is never truly seen. The castle may stand tall on its cliff, but the foundation is cracked, not from lack of magic, but from lack of understanding. If Hogwarts is to be the greatest school of witchcraft and wizardry, then it must begin to teach like one. Until then, its most haunting mystery isn't in the Forbidden Forest or the locked chambers below. It is in the classroom itself, where brilliance and struggle sit side by side, unrecognized, unaddressed, and unchanged. Number 23. Who manages staff conflicts? In the ancient stone corridors of Hogwarts, beneath the ever-watchful eyes of talking portraits and the echoing footfalls of enchanted suits of armor, a strange and persistent question lingers. Who, if anyone, truly watches the watchers? Professors come and go from the Great Hall with regal poise, their black robes swishing dramatically behind them. But what remains hidden is the undercurrent of power, resentment, and unspoken tension that flows beneath the surface. While the school has explicit rules for student conduct and even a system of house points and detentions to enforce them, the behavior of the staff remains cloaked in mystery. There is no visible oversight, no ethics board, no ombudsman, only the assumption that wisdom and age equate to virtue. But is that always the case? Consider Severus Snape and Filius Flitwick, two men who occupy opposite poles of personality and philosophy. Flitwick, the cheerful and diminutive charms master, delights in creativity, in the subtle harmonics of incantations, and even conducts the Hogwarts choir. Snape, by contrast, is sharp-edged, sarcastic, and dismissive of anything he deems unnecessary, which often includes anything not strictly utilitarian. Flitwick might view a charm as a form of artistic expression, while Snape would scoff and call it frivolous wand-waving. In The Half-Blood Prince, when Slughorn hosts his Slug Club dinner, Snape is notably absent, perhaps avoiding such company not out of disinterest alone, but out of disdain for what he sees as petty social games. What happens then when these philosophical tensions become more than silent disapproval? No one talks about faculty meetings at Hogwarts. We see no staff lounges beyond the occasional glimpse, and no open discussions about curriculum design. When Hermione Granger is scolded for using a time turner to attend extra classes, it's revealed that Professor McGonagall had to make arrangements with the Ministry of Magic, not with a school committee, not with fellow staff. This hints at a dangerous truth. Decision-making in Hogwarts appears frighteningly autocratic. Each professor rules their domain like a fiefdom, with Dumbledore acting more as an abstract sovereign than a managerial overseer. If there are disputes between teachers, where are they resolved? During the dueling club fiasco in the Chamber of Secrets, we see an absurd and telling moment. Gilderoy Lockhart, hopelessly incompetent, is given control of a potentially dangerous student activity. Snape's contempt is visible, his actions laced with aggression, especially when he forcefully disarms Lockhart in front of the students. "I think I know who would be best to demonstrate, Professor Snape," Lockhart says cheerfully, only for Snape to nearly blast him off the stage. It is all played for laughs, but beneath the surface is something far darker. A teacher publicly humiliating a colleague, unchecked and unchallenged. Who disciplines Snape? Who calls him to account for his favoritism, for his abuse of students like Neville Longbottom, or his open hatred for Harry? Even more unsettling is the fact that Dumbledore, revered and beloved, does not intervene in most of these cases. He knows of Snape's cruelties, he knows of Sybil Trelawney's alcoholism and professional incompetence. He knows that Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, is turning students into animals and coercing them with illegal curses. And yet time and time again, Dumbledore remains silent, a master of the long game, a chess player willing to sacrifice pawns. There is no indication of teacher evaluations, no peer reviews, no interstaff arbitration. One wonders if Hogwarts isn't less a school and more a stage for magical feuds wrapped in academic robes. Even in small moments, tension seeps through. When Professor Umbridge invades Hogwarts under the Ministry's command, her role as High Inquisitor, intrusive and brutal though it may be, fills a vacuum that already existed. The staff have no precedent for oversight, and when Umbridge begins evaluating teachers, the responses range from outrage to passive resistance. In Order of the Phoenix, she interrupts McGonagall's class, prompting the deputy headmistress to growl, "I should have made my meaning plainer. He has achieved outstanding grades in every test we have given him." The tone is cold, precise, a professional defending her methods with academic pride. But the very fact that this is the first time in decades someone has even questioned how classes are taught exposes the deep flaws in Hogwarts governance. What if McGonagall and Sprout disagree on how to discipline students caught brewing illicit potions? What if Flitwick believes in second chances while Snape demands expulsion? These ideological rifts are not hypothetical. They are real, persistent, and potentially corrosive. In the absence of a clear hierarchy beneath the headmaster, the only resolution is private argument, passive aggression, or, in the worst cases, silence. The famous British boarding school model that inspired Hogwarts often depended on rigid social structures and concealed abuses. Is Hogwarts really so different? The lack of accountability becomes even more alarming when one remembers that Hogwarts staff not only teach, but live together. There are no weekends off campus, no chance to escape the castle walls. This breeds familiarity, but also resentment. Who decides room allocations? Who decides which courses get preference in the timetable? When Lockhart barges in and insists on leading the dueling club, does he get clearance from anyone? Apparently not. Is there a department head meeting? If so, it's never shown. Does Flitwick ever complain about being given the worst classroom slot during exams? We never hear it. But the silence is its own answer. In the case of Lupin's brief tenure, the prejudice among the staff is tangible, even if politely veiled. Snape clearly disapproves of Lupin not just for personal reasons, but because he believes a werewolf has no place among students. No meeting is held to discuss this. Snape simply acts, brewing Wolfsbane potion grudgingly, and later, when the truth about Lupin is revealed, Snape leaks it with quiet satisfaction. The decision to hire Lupin is Dumbledore's alone. The fallout is Lupin's burden. No one shares responsibility because no one shares power. Hogwarts is portrayed as a bastion of knowledge, but it often functions like a monarchy. When Dumbledore is absent, chaos erupts. When he returns, all is well. There is no middle management, no board of trustees, no council of elders. The idea of a neutral ethics committee or even a small board of internal review is foreign to Hogwarts. Conflicts are not managed. They are endured, repressed, or weaponized. It's telling that Snape, who harbours resentment and bitterness for decades, is never once given a space to air his grievances constructively. Nor is Trelawney offered help when she drinks to numb her own perceived worthlessness. The friendships among teachers are hinted at but never developed. We never see McGonagall and Flitwick discussing pedagogy over tea, nor do we see Sprout mentoring younger staff. The only bonds shown are strategic or nostalgic: Hagrid and Dumbledore, Slughorn and his former students. Hogwarts is less a community and more a constellation of isolated stars, each one brilliant, but often burning alone. Even the staff table in the Great Hall reflects this, professors seated in a long row facing students, not each other. In moments of school-wide crisis, the attack on Katie Bell, the opening of the chamber, the presence of Sirius Black, we see the staff respond as a group. But even these moments are not democratic. They are commands passed down. Dumbledore leads, and the rest obey. It is only when he is gone that McGonagall steps up, and even then we see the strain. She becomes both enforcer and protector, but without a clear system to support her. When Snape flees after killing Dumbledore, there is no investigation, no internal hearing, only grief and confusion. If Hogwarts ever had an internal code of ethics for staff, it has been long buried beneath centuries of tradition and reverence. It is easier to believe in the wisdom of the old than to question their decisions. But this leaves room for abuse, for unchecked egos, for private wars waged in the shadow of education. Perhaps the only reason it all functions is because of the loyalty and strength of a few exceptional individuals who prioritize students above their own feuds, but even that is a fragile foundation. Without transparency, the line between discipline and vengeance, between eccentricity and negligence, becomes blurred. Hogwarts teaches defense against the dark arts, but who defends Hogwarts from itself? When professors go too far, when alliances become toxic, when values clash irreconcilably, there is no formal process to address it, just silence and a hope that the next headmaster will be better. In the end, Hogwarts may be magical, but its governance remains disturbingly human. Number 24. Who designs the curriculum? In the flickering candlelight of the Great Hall, beneath enchanted skies that mirrored the mood of the outside world, young witches and wizards dutifully filed in, books clutched tightly to their chests, ready for another day of learning the ancient ways. But if one were to stop and look, truly look beyond the polished oak tables and stern-faced professors, a curious observer might begin to question the very structure behind this education. Who decided that 13-year-olds should study the anatomy of Grindylows but not the rights of magical creatures in court? Who decreed that dreams and teacups held more academic weight than the ethical use of memory charms. The Hogwarts curriculum, steeped in centuries of tradition, rarely invites scrutiny. Students arrive, sort their houses, and begin classes like transfiguration, potions, charms, and herbology, as if these were the only magical disciplines that mattered. Yet one cannot help but wonder, why these subjects? Why are divination and care of magical creatures optional electives, while arithmancy and ancient runes remain mysterious niches, often avoided altogether? The books offer no official answer, and the professors never question it aloud, but the structure is rigid and eerily unquestioned. The names behind the classes are familiar. Professor McGonagall teaches transfiguration with a rigid sense of precision, believing that understanding the laws of magical transformation is essential. Severus Snape, before his dark history was rewritten in the minds of many, ruled potions like a tyrant, insisting that brewing was an art only the disciplined could master. And Sybil Trelawney, tucked away in her tower, delivered hazy predictions through the fog of incense and sherry. Yet not one of them speaks of how or why these subjects were chosen to form the backbone of a wizard's education. The silence on this matter is as deafening as a silencing charm. It would be logical to assume the Ministry of Magic plays a role. After all, the same governing body that regulates wand use governs the Wizengamot and maintains international secrecy laws would surely want a hand in shaping the future of wizarding society. But Dolores Umbridge, the Ministry's most glaring intrusion into Hogwarts, revealed just how little oversight truly exists. Her appointment as High Inquisitor came not from an established educational board, but as a reactionary political move. Her infamous decree, Educational Decree No. 23, allowed her to evaluate and dismiss teachers at will. Yet this was not standard policy. It was an anomaly brought on by panic and control. If the ministry doesn't regularly intervene, then who does? Some may argue that the headmaster holds supreme authority. Indeed, Albus Dumbledore wielded immense influence over Hogwarts, often bending rules or ignoring them altogether. He allowed Harry to take private lessons in occlumency when the subject wasn't part of the official curriculum. He recruited Gilderoy Lockhart, an incompetent charlatan, for a critical teaching role. Yet despite his power, Dumbledore never altered the core subjects or added new ones. He upheld a structure that may well have been in place since the castle's founding. This suggests that even he, the most unconventional of headmasters, was either unwilling or unable to disrupt the system. Perhaps then it is the weight of tradition that binds the school more tightly than any bureaucratic policy. Hogwarts is ancient, founded over 1,000 years ago by 4 of the most powerful witches and wizards of their time: Godric Gryffindor, Salazar Slytherin, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Helga Hufflepuff. They established the school to pass on knowledge, but what knowledge was deemed worthy? Did Salazar Slytherin push for potions while Rowena favoured arithmancy? Could the founders themselves have etched their academic values into the stone of Hogwarts, leaving a legacy too revered to question? If so, then the school has become less a place of learning and more a mausoleum of outdated priorities. There is no mandatory curriculum on mental defense, for example, a curious omission in a world where legislamancy and occlumency can violate the sanctity of thought. Severus Snape attempted to teach Harry occlumency not because it was on the syllabus, but because Voldemort was penetrating his mind. The scene is telling. The mind is not a book, to be opened at will and examined at leisure, Snape told him, revealing the terrifying reality that minds could be breached and exploited. Yet this form of protection is never taught to all students. It is not a requirement, but a desperate private lesson. Why? Then there is the absence of magical law or ethics. Wizards grow up with great power, but are rarely instructed in the moral use of spells. Memory charms, unforgivable curses, and love potions, these are all covered in theory, but not examined with ethical depth. When Hermione Granger modifies her parents' memories to protect them from Voldemort, she does so without guidance or supervision. It is a profoundly heavy act, and yet nowhere in the books do we see a course that would have taught her the emotional or legal ramifications. The lack of structure in such areas is not only startling, it's dangerous. What of financial literacy? Wizardkind uses a monetary system based on gold, silver, and bronze coins, and trades in everything from goblin-forged artifacts to enchanted quills. Yet there is no sign of a course teaching young wizards how to manage money, negotiate with goblins, or understand Gringotts contracts. Fred and George Weasley opened a successful business right after leaving school, but they learned nothing of entrepreneurship at Hogwarts. Their success came from creativity and risk, not education. One might wonder how many others could thrive if the curriculum offered more than creature care and cauldron temperatures. The subject of Muggle studies is perhaps the most ironic of all. Offered as an elective, it is often treated as a novelty, a strange indulgence for curious students. But in a world that coexists, albeit uncomfortably, with non-magical society, understanding Muggle politics, technology, and law seems vital. The fact that Arthur Weasley, a ministry official, can barely comprehend how a rubber duck works reveals the depth of magical ignorance. Worse, many pure-blood students avoid the subject altogether, reinforcing the cultural divide that Dumbledore himself worked so hard to bridge. The absence of a clear structure also affects the order of learning. First years are introduced to levitation charms and basic potions, while seventh years study advanced transfiguration and apparition. But who decides this progression? Who decided that 14-year-olds were ready to see the terrifying boggart in Lupin's third-year Defense Against the Dark Arts class, but never study advanced protective spells until much later? Why does it take a Triwizard tournament for a student like Harry to learn basic magical survival tactics? There seems to be no consistent logic, just an inherited ladder of topics never reassessed. Even the presence of certain teachers raises concerns. When Gilderoy Lockhart was hired, no one questioned the lack of background checks or teaching experience. Quirrell taught while possessed by Lord Voldemort. Barty Crouch Jr. impersonated Moody for an entire year. These events suggest there is no stable board or oversight committee, no academic council, just a headmaster making isolated decisions and a system of magical inertia too stubborn to change. If Hogwarts were a modern educational institution, such failures would trigger investigations, reforms, perhaps even closures. In the wizarding world, they barely spark conversation. One might suppose the school governors could influence policy. After all, they dismissed Dumbledore during Chamber of Secrets due to pressure from Lucius Malfoy. But these governors are rarely mentioned, their role vague and ceremonial. They do not create syllabi or influence coursework. Their authority seems limited to the hiring and firing of the headmaster, not the shaping of young minds. They are, in effect, spectators of an ancient system too cloaked in legend to challenge. Even when students express curiosity outside the bounds of their lessons, they find little institutional support. Hermione had to use a time turner to study additional subjects, an extraordinary magical artifact granted only through ministry exception. Instead of adjusting the curriculum to nurture curiosity, the system forced her to manipulate time. That speaks volumes about Hogwarts' priorities. Rigid structure outweighs intellectual exploration. Tradition trumps evolution. And yet, perhaps that is the essence of Hogwarts. It is a school caught between timeless wonder and static dogma. A place where portraits whisper ancient advice, ghosts roam with unfinished stories, and staircases move of their own volition, but the curriculum stays exactly the same. The question is not only who sets the course content, but why no one ever thinks to change it. Why no student council, no suggestion box, no annual review, just silence, parchment, and ink. There is a kind of tragic beauty in this stagnation. A school that refuses to modernize because it confuses age with wisdom, tradition with truth, but in doing so it risks failing the very children it aims to protect. Hogwarts is more than a castle, it is a mirror of the wizarding world. And like any mirror, it reflects both the brilliance and the blind spots of those who created it. Number 25. Are there lessons about the Muggle world? Every September, the enchanted gates of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry swing open to admit a new wave of 11-year-olds, their wide eyes gleaming with awe and disbelief. For many of them, particularly the Muggle-born students, the magical world is a dazzling shock, a complete departure from the humdrum logic of modern society. Yet what is rarely addressed, and never answered, is what happens in reverse. How do wizard-born students, raised with floating candles and fireplace transport, learn to engage with the non-magical world of cars, phones, electricity, and taxis? At Hogwarts, the answer seems to be silence. Hermione Granger, whose parents were both Muggle dentists, was often portrayed as the bridge between two worlds. She knew how to navigate the tube, understood electricity, and had used a telephone. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, she even wrote to Victor Crumb over the summer using Muggle Post, because Crumb didn't have access to an owl. Her experience highlighted how rare this knowledge was. Ron Weasley once poked at a telephone with his wand, shouting into the receiver as if it were a tin can. "Your son, Ronald, called me a Muggle-loving blood traitor," Hermione told Lucius Malfoy in a fit of fury. But what she didn't say, and what the series never explored, was that Hogwarts never attempted to teach its students anything about the world she came from. Arthur Weasley's obsession with Muggle artifacts, collecting plugs and batteries, was presented as quirky comic relief. Yet beneath the humour lay a troubling reality. Here was a high-ranking ministry employee with no functional knowledge of the world Muggle citizens inhabited. He once asked Harry, what exactly is the function of a rubber duck? But perhaps the more important question was, why had no institution ever taught him? Why does no class exist at Hogwarts, even as an elective, to explore the laws, norms, and dangers of the Muggle world? During Harry's 5th year, when the ministry interfered directly with Hogwarts' curriculum, through Dolores Umbridge, the educational priorities of the wizarding government became painfully clear. The focus was on theory, control, and preservation of magical traditions. There was no room in Umbridge's regime for practical magic, let alone for understanding or integrating with Muggle society. Yet even after her departure, no new subject was introduced to bridge the ever-widening gap. The implication was unsettling. Perhaps the magical world never truly intended to close it. The oversight becomes more glaring when one considers that many witches and wizards must, at some point, live among or interact with Muggles. Tonks, a young Auror who trained under Mad-Eye Moody, operated undercover during several missions. Did she ever receive training on Muggle behavior or expectations? Or did she rely entirely on improvisation? The same question applies to Kingsley Shacklebolt, who worked within the Muggle Prime Minister's office under the guise of a secretary. His smooth handling of both magical and non-magical affairs suggests personal brilliance, not institutional preparation. The failure to educate students about Muggles also raises ethical concerns. By not offering these lessons, the school system passively promotes ignorance, or worse, contempt, toward the non-magical world. Draco Malfoy, raised in a pure-blood family, often sneered at Muggles, calling them filthy and beneath wizarding kind. This prejudice may be rooted in family teachings, but it is sustained by an educational environment that never challenges such beliefs. Had Hogwarts offered classes on Muggle culture, history, or even basic technology, would Draco's view have changed? Would he have had the chance to unlearn his bias through structured learning rather than trauma and war? Even the subjects taught at Hogwarts seem disconnected from any contemporary context. While students learn to transfigure animals and concoct potions that change human biology, they never learn how magic might coexist with a society that operates on science. There is no class that discusses how to hide your identity in a world of surveillance cameras, or what to do if your wand is confiscated in an airport. There's no mention of laws about using magic in front of non-magical individuals beyond the general "you must not" rule. In a time where information flows freely and where even a stray photograph can go viral, such oversight borders on dangerous negligence. Consider Remus Lupin, perhaps one of the most well-rounded and compassionate professors Hogwarts ever employed. His empathy stemmed partly from a life spent in hardship, but also from years of living in both the magical and non-magical margins. He dressed modestly, understood the rhythms of Muggle life, and seemed unbothered by their ways. But Lupin's knowledge was acquired through necessity, not instruction. No course prepared him for the duality of his existence. Like so many others, he learned by being thrown into the deep end without support or structure. The most telling example comes from Harry himself. Raised in a Muggle household, he knew how to use a toaster but not a wand, and yet by his 5th year he was expected to know how to perform defensive spells, break into the Ministry, and survive in the Forbidden Forest, none of which was tested by Albuels, but all of which proved essential. Conversely, when he returned to the non-magical world after the war, there is no indication that he, or any of his classmates, were given guidance on how to reintegrate. What if they wanted to attend a Muggle university? Apply for a loan? Marry a Muggle and raise a child in 2 cultures? The silence is telling. Perhaps the assumption is that graduates of Hogwarts will live entirely within the magical community. But this assumption contradicts the canon. The Ministry of Magic, after all, operates directly alongside the Muggle government, often needing to coordinate on matters of magical disturbance. It is deeply irresponsible to assume that future Auras, Obliviators, or Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes staff won't need more than just a vague awareness of the Muggle world. They need fluency. There is also the issue of survival. Muggle technology is not merely curious, it is critical. Mobile phones, the internet, GPS, these are tools of modern existence. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the trio spends months on the run, often camping in areas far from civilization. They never think to use a map, a compass, or even to consider how Muggles might track them. A wizard's reliance on magic is total, and when magic fails, as it often does when under duress, the lack of Muggle knowledge becomes a fatal liability. Hogwarts' curriculum is frozen in time, as if the entire institution exists within a protective bubble. Charms and potions, transfiguration and herbology, all timeless in their own right. But timeless does not mean complete. It is possible to revere tradition and still evolve. Why not offer a Muggle integration elective in 6th or 7th year? Why not allow guest lecturers, like Hermione's parents, to speak about the world outside the wand? The only class that even remotely approaches this intersection is Muggle Studies, and even that subject is marred by narrow vision. Described as the study of the daily lives of Muggles, it is often mocked by pure-blood students as pointless or laughable. When taught by Charity Burbage, the subject gained a more empathetic angle, one that cost her her life when Voldemort had her murdered for promoting Muggle equality. Her death was a symbolic blow not just to her beliefs but to the very idea that Muggles mattered in magical pedagogy. And so the problem persists. Hogwarts, in all its grandeur, remains a school built for a world that no longer exists. Its inhabitants continue to operate under the illusion that isolation equals safety, that ignorance is a form of protection. But the veil between the magical and the non-magical is thinning. Cameras are everywhere. Drones fly overhead. Satellites scan forests where once only wizards walked. A Patronus cannot erase a video, an Obliviate cannot undo a digital trace. The world has changed, and magic cannot afford to remain unchanged. Until Hogwarts wakes from its enchanted slumber and begins to teach its students not only how to cast spells but also how to live in a world where spells are not the only source of power, it will continue to fail them. Because the most dangerous magic isn't dark or forbidden, it's the magic of ignorance, cloaked in tradition, passed down without question, defended without thought. And that is a lesson no wand can unteach. Number 26. Who disciplines the teachers? In the enchanted walls of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, much has been said about the rules, the consequences of breaking them, and the strict hand with which students are often disciplined. From first years to seventh years, young witches and wizards tread carefully to avoid losing house points, facing detentions, or worse, expulsion. The school's disciplinary structure is made crystal clear. Argus Filch gleefully oversees punishments, professors deduct points with a flick of their wand, and headmasters or deputy heads intervene when necessary. Yet behind this well-defined hierarchy lies a silent question that J.K. Rowling never fully answered, a question that lingers in the shadowed corners of Hogwarts' long hallways. Who disciplines the professors? Severus Snape, the enigmatic potions master, is the most striking example of unchecked authority. Throughout the series, his blatant bias and cruelty towards students, especially those from Gryffindor, go unquestioned. When Neville Longbottom, a shy and anxious boy, was subjected to public humiliation, time and again no adult stepped in. Snape once said Neville's greatest fear was him, and in Prisoner of Azkaban the boggart confirms it. A child's worst fear should never be their teacher. And yet Snape ridicules Neville's abilities and fears, going as far as to suggest, in the Philosopher's Stone, why don't you all copy down the instructions so I don't have to keep repeating myself to dunderheads? This isn't tough love, this is sustained psychological harm. Dolores Umbridge, though a ministry implant, further illustrates the dangers of absolute power unchecked. Her reign of terror in Order of the Phoenix shows a school utterly unprepared to discipline those at the top of the chain. Her educational decrees override even Dumbledore's influence for a time, and her punishments, including cruel detentions involving a blood quill that etched words into Harry's skin, were accepted in silence by most of the staff. Even when McGonagall opposes her, there is no official channel of accountability. Hogwarts governance seems to crumble in the face of authoritarian figures. One could argue that Albus Dumbledore, as headmaster, was the ultimate authority and responsible for keeping his staff in line. But Dumbledore, as noble as he was, had a troubling habit of turning a blind eye to problematic behavior. His failure to intervene in Snape's classroom cruelty is evident, and his initial refusal to act against Umbridge, citing ministry control, paints a picture of a school leader more interested in politics than protection. Even during the Triwizard Tournament, he allowed Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, to teach curses like the Cruciatus and Imperius to fourth-year students. No review board, no oversight, just trust. Trust that was grossly misplaced. This absence of disciplinary structure raises further questions. Does the Hogwarts Board of Governors play any role in monitoring staff conduct? The only time we hear of them taking decisive action is in Chamber of Secrets, when they temporarily suspend Dumbledore after pressure from Lucius Malfoy. Their concern was not with student safety, but public perception. There's no mention of them evaluating teaching practices, psychological welfare of students, or enforcing any code of conduct for professors. When the worst abuses happen, the victims are left to fend for themselves. Minerva McGonagall, by contrast, often appears as the moral compass of the teaching staff. She supports Harry when he's unfairly punished and corrects behavior when lines are crossed, yet even she seems bound by invisible chains. Her protests against Umbridge go ignored, and she too fails to check Snape's bullying beyond the occasional glare or comment. When Hermione Granger is belittled for her intelligence, or when Ron Weasley is mocked for his poverty, there's little evidence of intervention from her or anyone else. It suggests a school culture where peer review among staff is virtually non-existent. The culture of immunity seems even more entrenched when we consider the case of Sybil Trelawney. While not malicious, she is objectively incompetent as a teacher, as McGonagall often implies. Yet she remains in her post until Umbridge's intervention, not because anyone assessed her teaching, but because she was a convenient target. Dumbledore defends her employment not on professional merit but because she once made a prophecy. Hogwarts, it seems, doesn't value educational standards as much as tradition, favoritism, or political expedience. It becomes clear that Hogwarts operates less like a school and more like a feudal manor, where the headmaster is a benevolent lord and the staff are landed knights, owed deference regardless of behaviour. Their dominion over classrooms is unquestioned, their word absolute, and their biases rarely challenged. When Harry receives unfair treatment from professors, he must often endure it silently or risk further punishment. It is only when he reaches Dumbledore himself that any redress is possible, and even then, it's wrapped in riddles and ambiguity. The case of Rubeus Hagrid further complicates the picture. Though kind-hearted, Hagrid is given a teaching post despite lacking formal qualifications. He struggles to manage his class, leading to Draco Malfoy being injured by a hippogriff in Prisoner of Azkaban. This becomes less a question of his intentions and more one of institutional responsibility. Who evaluated Hagrid's teaching readiness? Who provided support or training? The answer, again, is no one. Hogwarts hires, retains, and defends staff with little transparency or due process. This mystery deepens in Half-Blood Prince when Horace Slughorn returns to teach potions. While Slughorn is genial and well-liked, he openly favours students he considers promising, inviting them to his exclusive slug club. This club reinforces elitism within the school. Talent becomes a ticket to privilege, and the rest are forgotten. While this favouritism is less overtly cruel than Snape's, it still warps the school's supposed values of fairness and equality. Remus Lupin's tenure as Defense Against the Dark Arts professor is one of the few bright spots. He's patient, fair, and inspiring, but when it's revealed he is a werewolf, he resigns, not because he has done wrong, but because public prejudice deems him unfit. Ironically, one of the most competent and compassionate teachers is the only one held accountable, not for misconduct, but for his nature. This reversal exposes the arbitrary and reactionary mechanisms at play in Hogwarts' staff structure. Even more unsettling is the lack of psychological safety for students. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry shares his traumatic experiences with Voldemort, he's dismissed by the Ministry, denied support by staff, and punished by Umbridge. No counsellor is ever introduced, no trauma specialist. Instead, the school relies on the stiff upper lip of British resilience. The professor's own emotional health is also never addressed. Staff with unresolved trauma, like Snape or even Trelawney, carry their wounds into the classroom, projecting them onto students. What emerges is a portrait of a magical institution that, while full of wonder, lacks the fundamental structures of accountability expected in any school. Students are punished with ruthless precision, while teachers operate in a moral vacuum. The implications of this are grave. It suggests that Hogwarts, for all its spells and enchantments, functions with the same flaws that plague real-world systems: favoritism, elitism, and silence in the face of injustice. When Draco Malfoy taunts students with impunity, or when Snape verbally abuses his class, the question isn't just about individual behaviour, it's about systemic failure. Who writes the rules and who enforces them? Without oversight, even the best intentions can curdle into oppression. Hogwarts teaches magic, but it fails to teach responsibility to its own staff. This silence around staff discipline also undermines the very lessons Hogwarts seeks to impart. What does it tell young witches and wizards when they are punished for minor rule-breaking while their educators act without consequence? It teaches submission, not justice. It reinforces fear, not respect. For all of Dumbledore's wisdom and kindness, his laissez-faire attitude toward faculty conduct leaves much to be desired. Leadership requires more than trust. It demands accountability. The legacy of this silence is long-lasting. We see its effects in the Battle of Hogwarts, where loyalty is valued more than fairness, and staff must suddenly become warriors. Yet the seeds of dysfunction were sown long before that final stand. They were planted in every ignored insult, every overlooked abuse, and every child who sat in class afraid of the very person meant to inspire them. The question remains, if Hogwarts were real, would we send our children there, or would we fear what they might endure behind its hallowed doors? Number 27. Why are there so few professors? In the enchanted halls of Hogwarts, where portraits whisper and staircases shift at will, an unsettling question has long lingered in the shadowed corners of its majestic architecture. For all its mystique and ancient legacy, Hogwarts seems to operate with a startling shortage of staff. Hundreds of students from 11 to 17 live, learn, and grow in this vast castle, yet only a handful of professors manage the entire academic, social, and emotional weight of their education. The issue is more than a logistical puzzle. It's a structural mystery embedded in the very fabric of magical schooling. Consider Professor McGonagall. As the Transfiguration teacher, head of Gryffindor House, and deputy headmistress, she is tasked with teaching an academically rigorous subject, managing the pastoral care of an entire house, substituting for Dumbledore in administrative duties, and disciplining students across the school. She is seen escorting first years, organising Triwizard Tournament affairs, and even supervising punishments. The sheer volume of her obligations borders on the inhuman. One must wonder, does she sleep, or has she mastered a time-turner without our knowing? Professor Snape is another glaring example. The Potions Master, later the Defense Against the Dark Arts instructor, and head of Slytherin House, is frequently seen overseeing detentions, teaching multiple year groups and acting as a double agent for Dumbledore. He spends much of his time lurking in corridors, intimidating students, and engaging in complex magical work. The idea that he is able to maintain such a schedule, especially with his extracurricular life as a spy, strains credibility. Surely, even with magic, a man cannot be in two places at once, unless, of course, he is. The absence of assistants or junior instructors is deafening. Nowhere in the books is there mention of teaching aides, classroom helpers, or even ghostly tutors. In Muggle schools, classes of 30 are often managed by a teacher and at least one aide. Hogwarts, however, seems to trust a single professor with instructing potentially dangerous magic to dozens of adolescents, alone. When Professor Lupin teaches third years how to fend off a boggart, no one stands ready in case of magical mishap. When Hagrid unveils a hippogriff, no support staff assist in handling the beast. It is as though each teacher is an island, required to navigate both curriculum and chaos without aid. Even more curious is the complete lack of a psychological support system. Hogwarts is a boarding school, meaning students live there full-time. Yet not once do we hear of a school counsellor, therapist, or any sort of mental health professional. The emotional trauma faced by students, Cedric Diggory's death, the frequent invasions by Dementors, even the torture under Carrows in Book 7, are met with silence. When Harry returns from the graveyard in Goblet of Fire, clutching Cedric's body, he is whisked away for a brief conversation with Dumbledore, but receives no formal support afterward. The idea that children experiencing life-altering trauma must simply get on with it reveals a deeper flaw in the educational structure. There is no visible system of academic mentoring either. Students are not assigned personal tutors. There are no teaching assistants to guide struggling learners, no exam coaches, and no extracurricular supervisors beyond the few heads of houses. When Hermione excels, it is due to her own diligence. When Neville fails, he simply fails. The disparity between students' magical abilities and learning styles is vast, yet no remedial programs exist. The notion that a school of magic would neglect this is baffling. Are we to believe that the most advanced institution of magical learning operates without a pedagogical safety net? The library, a cornerstone of any educational institution, seems equally understaffed. Irma Pintz, the school librarian, is its sole guardian. She is described as suspicious, vulture-like, and overprotective of the books under her care. In a school where knowledge is literally dangerous, where books bite, scream, or vanish, surely she requires assistance. Yet she is always alone, policing the shelves without help, issuing threats to students who dare mistreat a volume. Even magical tomes require organization, repair, and cataloguing. That one witch oversees an entire library filled with enchanted texts raises more questions than it answers. The same scarcity applies to Hogwarts' physical maintenance. Who cleans the castle? Who prepares the food, washes linens, repairs damage after Peeves's tantrums or a stray jinx in a duel? The answer is partially revealed through the house elves in the kitchens. Dobby proudly proclaims their role in food preparation, and Hermione's SPEW crusade brings attention to their labor, but even they are invisible, literally and metaphorically. There is no mention of a head of maintenance, no logistics coordinator. The staff appears content to allow unseen, unpaid magical creatures to manage the daily upkeep. It's a troubling reliance that hints at deeper issues of exploitation. Sports training is another curious void. Quidditch is central to Hogwarts life, yet no formal coach exists. Teams are managed by student captains, children. Oliver Wood is responsible for designing drills, ensuring player fitness, and enforcing discipline. No adult oversees these dangerous, high-speed games. Injuries occur frequently. Harry breaks arms, Malfoy is knocked unconscious, Katie Bell is cursed, Madam Hooch is only seen teaching first-year flying and refereeing matches. She never trains players, treats injuries, or moderates rivalries. The absence of adult supervision in such a perilous sport is borderline negligent. The arts suffer a similar neglect, though the school choir appears briefly in Prisoner of Azkaban, singing double, double toil and trouble, as toads croak melodically. There is no mention of a music teacher. Who trains the students? Who selects the repertoire? Who organizes the rehearsals or arranges the magical harmonies? One might speculate that Professor Flitwick, known for his charm and musicality, takes on this role, but this is never confirmed. He already teaches charms, possibly to every year group, making it unlikely that he moonlights as a choir director. The Defense Against the Dark Arts class presents another contradiction. Year after year, a new professor is installed, each more unfit or short-lived than the last. Quirrell is possessed, Lockhart is a fraud, Lupin is competent but leaves due to prejudice, Moody is an imposter, Umbridge is a sadist, Snape's tenure is brief and toxic. If the school is aware of the job's curse, why not divide the subject, bring in co-teachers, or develop a safer training model? The revolving door of dangerous mentors endangers students more than it educates them, yet the issue is met with resignation. Even the teaching of complex subjects like arithmancy and ancient runes appears to be handled by solitary figures. Professors Vector and Babbling are barely mentioned, but presumably they handle entire year groups alone. The same applies to astronomy, herbology, and history of magic. Professor Binns, a ghost, drones endlessly without adapting his lectures or assessing comprehension. That no inspector or head of curriculum intervenes in such a dysfunctional class structure implies either a staggering level of magical autonomy or a lack of care.